This is the last video I would suggest watching in the series of the functions videos. So we'll be looking at the domain and range of a function. The complete set of input x values is called the domain. So the domain are the values that x can take. So here, what could x be? Well, x could be 5. We could put 5 into this function, right? 3 times 5 plus 1, 16. Choose another number. X could be negative 10. 3 times negative 10, negative 30, plus 1, negative 29. Well, x could take any value, couldn't it? X can be any value from minus infinity to plus infinity. So the domain would be x between minus infinity and plus infinity. The corresponding set of output y values is called the range. So we've got the function written in function notation, but if we wrote it equal to y, the y value are kind of the answers. So you need to think of x as the input, the values you're putting into the function, and y are the numbers that are coming out, if you think of it as a basic function machine. So what values can y be? Well, we looked at when x was 5, 3 times 5 plus 1 is 16. The function would equal the 16, the output will be 16. But again, the input can be anything, the output can actually be anything. So the range are the values the function can take, anything from minus infinity to plus infinity. Let's just look at this other one here, this next one. So here our function is equal to x squared. What would the domain be? Well, if we have a think about this, could we put the value 4 into this function as an input? Well, 4 squared is 16. Yeah, that works fine. What if we put a negative number in? Negative 10. Negative 10 squared is 100. Yeah, so again, our domain, any numbers between minus infinity and plus infinity. Okay, what about the range? What are the values the output can be? So we did consider, we put 2, well, I think we put 4 squared in. I'm going to put 2 squared in, which is 4. Negative 10 squared is 100. So if you think about, if you square a number, we always get a positive answer. So our range actually can only be positive. Let's just check with 0. 0 squared is 0, so yes, 0 is fine. So the range of the function is all positive numbers. So f of x can be anything bigger than or equal to 0. For the IGCSE Edexcel exam board, they like to look at questions of, like, similar to this. So state which values that must be excluded from the domain. So let's just think about the domain. The domain is your input, any value that x can be. You might want to use your calculator for this, but let's have a think about what value x cannot be here. Well, x could be 5. We could do 1 divided by 5. X could be negative. What about 0? What happens when you divide by 0? You get a math error on your calculator. 1 divided by 0 is impossible. X cannot be 0, but the question's asking which value must be excluded from the domain. X equals 0 must be excluded. So when you're dividing, the denominator cannot be 0. Just look at this. The denominator can't be 0. I'm just going to put this equal to 0 and solve by adding 2 to both sides. Put 2 into this. 2 minus 2 is 0. So x cannot be 2. We want to know again what value is excluded from the domain, x equals 2. Okay, so what about if we're square rooting an input? So what values must be excluded from the domain here? This time, can we square root 0? You've got your calculator, just double check if you want. Yes, we can square root 0. When is there a problem with square rooting? Try square rooting a negative number, you get a maths error. So what value must be excluded from the domain here? X is less than 0. It can be 0, that's fine. X is less than 0, must be excluded from the domain. And here again, we don't want the bit under the root to be negative. I'm actually going to put it as an inequality here. Anything less than 0 under this root would be excluded from the domain. Let me solve this inequality. X is less than 2, must be excluded from the domain. If you just have a little think about it once you've got your answer, well, if x was 1, which is less than 2, 1 minus 2 is negative. Can't square root a negative number. Okay, maybe have a look at these questions yourself. Put me on pause and unpause when you have completed them. Okay, let's just look at this first one here. We do not want our denominator to be 0. Let's take 1 off both sides. X cannot be minus 1, but it's asking for the values that must be excluded from the domain. X is equal to negative 1. So if I put negative 1 into this function, minus 1 plus 1 is 0. Cannot divide by 0. Again, I'm going to put my denominator equal to 0, make x the subject, x equals 1, must be excluded from the domain. This time we don't want it to be negative. The reason I'm putting it less than 0 is because I'm looking for the values that must be excluded from the domain. Add 2 to both sides. Anything less than 2, so it can be 2 because 2 take away 2 is 0. You can square root you can square root 0. If it was 1, 1 take away 2 is negative. No. Add x to both sides. X bigger than 2 must be excluded from the domain. If x is bigger than 2, for example 3, 2 take away 3, negative. So question 5. X here, this can take any value. Here x cannot be 0, so x equals 0 must be excluded from the domain. 6. Similar here, 0 squared would give you 0. Okay, question 7. If you think about this one, x squared plus 3, well, x actually can be any value. It says state which values, if any, must be excluded from the domain of these functions, so no values here. X can be any real number, we say in maths. Again, x can take any real value, so it's no values here. Now, let's have a look at 9 here. Under the square root, we cannot have the square root negative, can we? So anything negative must be excluded from the domain. Add 4 to both sides. Square root both sides. Well, this is interesting, isn't it? Because negative 2 squared gives you 4. Let's have a think about this. So if x was 2, 2 squared minus 4 would give us a negative answer. 1 squared minus 4. So we don't want anything less than 2, do we? take the negative 2. So if, well, okay, let's take a number smaller than negative 2, negative 3. Negative 3 squared is 9. 9 take away 4 is 5, which you can square root. Let's take something above it, negative 1. Negative 1 squared minus 4 is 0, so it's actually x cannot take any values between 2 and negative 2. Number 10. Again, we do not want our value under the square root to be negative. Add x squared to both sides. Divide both sides by, so square root both sides. And again, let's think about this in a bit more detail. If x is bigger than 3, can x be bigger than 3? Okay, well, if x is 5, 9 minus 5 squared definitely cannot be. So x is bigger than 3, must be excluded from the domain. Let's take x is bigger than negative 3. Okay, so x is bigger than negative 2. So 9 minus negative 2 squared. Negative 2 squared is 4. 9 minus 4, yeah, it's positive, that's fine. So let's have a look at x less than negative 3. Minus 4. So 9 subtract minus 4 squared. Minus 4 squared is 16. Will that give a negative answer? No, it's not possible. Okay, so maybe have a look now in my past paper questions section. You should find some on functions